Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. What if you could be calmer, happier, and more resilient in just 12 minutes per day? On this episode, I talked to Dawson Church about how to rewire your brain in measurable ways using lessons from meditation and neuroscience. Have a listen on how you can achieve what Dawson refers to as bliss brain. And I hope you enjoy the meditation that he takes us through halfway through the episode. Dawson, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'd like to start with you with the question I start all my guests with, which is, what are 2 to 3 things that are motivating you in life right now? And what do you want to make sure we get out today for our listeners to hear in our conversation?
What a great way to start off with, Clint. And I love contemplating that. And the main thing I love about my life is being happy. And I began life as a very unhappy person. So now, decades later, to be an extraordinarily happy person, not because I'm trying to be, just because I organically am, as a result of all the work I've done, both trauma release and looking for elevated states. So that to me is a privilege. I wake up every day feeling gratitude. And the main thing I want people to know is this is what research shows you. This is going to be really hard for you to believe. People have a real belief gap here, but I'm going to tell you this is true. And this is based on MRI and EEG studies. We know that you can have 7 times the amount of happiness and compassion and gratitude brain waves in your brain than the average person has. When we hook people up, they have a certain configuration of what we call these pro-social emotions. In meditation adepts, we measure their levels of those emotions, gratitude, happiness, compassion, and there's 7 times that. In fact, there's some that are more than 7 times that. So the bottom line is you can be 7 times as happy as the happiest you think you can be right now. And that's what science tells us.
And a lot of what we'll talk about today is how we get into the states ourselves, that it's taken some of these, as you call adepts, it's taken them, let's say, 10,000 hours of meditating daily for hours per day.
I know, like if you'd asked people, well, if you do ask people now, but if you suddenly have asked people 30 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, how do you get that happy? How do you find true inner peace? How do you live a life of contentment? How do you live at what I call in my books, oneness with non-local mind? I don't get into religion or theology, but I call it non-local mind. And that's just the state of a sense of being one with the universe that's greater than ourselves. And the answer used to be 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, you go into a monastery, you take vows of poverty and chastity and obedience, and you sit at the feet of a master for 10 years, spend 10,000 hours. They then accept you as an apprentice. You spend another 10 years with them. And then after maybe 20 years, you start to hit those states. And that was a really big, bold, wonderful guarantee those monasteries used to make. Now, I've literally done a week-long retreat, 7 days at a retreat center, hooking people up to an EEG beforehand, giving them a battery of psychological and physiological tests, and then training them for a week. And then at the end of the week, they're getting there in 4 minutes, 5 minutes, certainly no longer than 7 or 8 minutes, and they're all getting there. Very rarely there's somebody who has trouble getting there or sustaining that state, and then some get there in under a minute. So the answer is that science is now equipping us with the tools to get people to these states really fast.
And the state that we're talking about is the title of the book that we'll be discussing today, which is Bliss Brain. And it is the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy, which are 3 great things. Dawson, when you start the book, you start with your experience with your wife living through a wildfire and recovering it from it. And I would even challenge that and say that you thrived coming out of it, which would not be normal for the average person. And so, can you take our listeners through what happened and through what some of those moments of growth were for the two of you? Some that really jumped out at me, for example, were the move to Petaluma. I may be pronouncing it wrong. The Four Seasons mindset and the fateful meetings that you ended up having with Tony Robbins and Tim Ferriss along the way. So I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, a lot happened in the year after the fire. Well, it was, I would say it was terrifying. And, you wonder what will happen if you find yourself in life at that situation. And when my wife shook me awake at 12:45 a.m. and said, Dawson, something's terribly wrong, I looked out the window and I saw the glow on the horizon, dashed out the door to our porch and saw the wildfire approaching. It's like I just knew what I had to do. I needed to take care of myself and my wife, and we needed to get out of there extremely quickly. And I just said at my loudest tone of voice, we're getting out of here right now. And we literally, the power went out at that moment, and we just fumbled in the dark, threw on clothes, grabbed our cell phones, ran out through this bizarre, it's hard to describe how weird it was. I've been in a lot of snowstorms on the East Coast, and in Chicago, New York, and Baltimore, and other places, and it was like a snowstorm, except these were burning white embers, and they were hitting the car. It was like the snowstorm, but it was blowing horizontally across the road because the winds were gusting up to 80 miles an hour. So it was a surreal experience of running out of the car, driving really fast out of the fire. And by the time we were a mile away, we knew we were basically safe. But then the next day, a friend of ours who had been able to sneak in past the National Guard texted us photographs of the house, which we still didn't know if it survived or not. And there was just this concrete slab, a little bit of ash on top, and a chimney sticking out. And that was it. And our office looked the same way. So we realized that everything we had was gone. And that was just it's a surreal experience to know that, absolutely every single thing you have is gone. And it took us a while just to get basic functionality going again. But we did. We had a lot of friends. We also called on therapist friends and energy healer friends. And then in the year after that, we were staying in a rented house, and I was meditating every day. And I began to get back very quickly to the state of mental equilibrium and bliss I'd been in before. In fact, even more bliss. And I began to read about these molecules, anandamide, the bliss molecule, and how these meditators, they have these huge just explosions of anandamide, dopamine, and serotonin. Dopamine is your basic motivational neurochemical, and it's unlocked in heroin, cocaine, and other cravings-based drugs. THC, the main ingredient in marijuana, docks with the same receptor sites in the brain as anandamide. And I began to realize that the reason I felt so stoned during meditation was that I was stoned. I was having a lot of psilocybin, which is the same as serotonin, these surges of dopamine, anandamide, all kinds of other bliss molecules, and you basically get incredibly happy, and your life has been devastated, and mine was. We lost all our money, we lost our entire office, we lost everything we owned. We were just hanging on for survival, and yet I was still in this blissful state. And I began to research that, and then as I read about these molecules and wrote about them, I thought, I have got to share this with people, that these kinds of devastating experiences. In fact, research shows in Chapter 7 of Bliss Brain, it's all about post-traumatic growth and about how the reality is that 2/3 of people who go through something like the fire or a horrible divorce or COVID or the economic crash or the housing crisis and your mortgage being underwater, losing your job, going to war, 2/3 of people not only survive, they thrive. They do fine through those crises. They're resilient. 1/3 of people, unfortunately, develop PTSD. But it's the majority experience that we don't. And so we can learn to thrive through these things. To some people, that actually becomes the springboard for growth. And so the first, Chapter 1 of Bliss Brain is the fire initially and the huge dislocation of the fire. And then it ends at the end of the following year. It's a 1-year cycle in that chapter with getting a very unexpected invitation to share the stage with Tony Robbins. And so I met Tim Ferriss that year. I shared the stage with Tony Robbins. I got to meet him and present to his group. All kinds of things happened in that year. And you just learn to go with the flow, move with where things are. But the bedrock of your existence, you learn, is that meditative state when you feel as though fundamentally all is well. I've lost my health, all is well. I've lost my home, all is well. I've lost my money, I've lost my office. All these apparent losses. And the one image in Bliss Brain that I put there, I made sure that that image got into the book, was an image of the office, came from the office the day after the fire. And of course, the office had burned, the filing cabinets had burned, the desks had burned, the computers, we couldn't even tell where they were. They were just molten puddles of metal on the ground and among the ash. And only one thing survived. And Clint, that one thing was a statue of the Buddha. And it had been stuck in the back of a closet for years, and we'd forgotten it was there. And when everything else went up in smoke, this Buddha just sits there serene in the ashes. And I thought, wow, what a metaphor for how compassion never dies, and love never dies, and joy never dies, and gratitude. Nobody can burn your gratitude. So that was my big learning from the fire.
And the part of the interesting part as you dove into that meditation was one of the things, because you mentioned that specific time, 12:45. And how long did it take, Dawson, before you started waking up an hour later? Because I think my recollection was for a period of time, every night at 12:45, you woke up in a state of arousal. And it wasn't until you'd meditated long enough and released enough of the bliss chemicals, if you will, that you were able to move past that state of arousal and wake up. I think it was at 1:45, and that told you things are getting better.
Yeah, and I first came across this working with Vietnam veterans, and I spent about 15 years researching PTSD. We also have a big nonprofit called the Veteran Stress Solution that treats veterans free of charge. And one man who served in Vietnam would wake up at 4:10 a.m. every morning. And it turned out, as we took his history, that his very first night in Vietnam, after he landed and was deployed in his base, there was a mortar attack on his base, and this young Marine dived under the bed. Now, the bed, of course, is not going to protect him from a mortar, but this happened his very first night there. And so when we treated him, which was in the first part of the 2000s, 2005, 2006, he was still waking up at 4:10 a.m. And of course, you had that pattern running in your brain. Those neurons are firing for 40 years, and it's really hard to break that pattern. So I saw this in PTSD survivors. And so for me, it was every night for a few months. Then it was intermittent. Then it began to shift, and then it was gone. So a healthy brain, and one with tools like energy psychology, like energy medicine, like good psychotherapy, meditation, all of these tools, you are able to erase those traumatic imprints and pathways in the brain. If you don't have those things, Clint, it just breaks my heart how many people just keep on reenacting their tragedies and dramas, not realizing you can get through that stuff. And in the Veteran Stress Solution program, we bring people through it in less than 10 sessions, less than 10 one-hour sessions. The nightmares are gone, the flashbacks are gone, the hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, they're just gone. And then you get your life back again.
That's very powerful, what our brains can do if we go through the right processes. And you mentioned one of the things I caught in there was you were talking about gratitude, and one of the things that helped you along the way, and then you recommend at the end of chapter 1, is you recommend that people buy a journal. And I love how you said handpick one that feels right to you and has that feeling. And then you suggest that we journal about gratitude, disasters that never happened, and near misses that might have occurred. What is it about those, Dawson, that helps get our brain into the right states that we want to get it into?
I was really struck by a comment that this psychologist called Robert Kegan made. I quote this in the book. And he used to be the head of adult development at Harvard University. And Harvard has been doing what they call the Adult Development Project, studying how adults develop mentally, emotionally, spiritually since 1938. So it's a long running project. And Robert Kegan used to be the head of that. And he said the single most important accelerator of human transformation is the ability to shift from being subjectively enmeshed in who you are to being an objective observer of who you are. Not always. Sometimes you get enmeshed in who you are, but you at least have the ability to step back. In neuroscience, it's called perspective taking. We have a perspective on our lives. If you are just sucked into your life and you think that your, what I call in my books, your local self is all there is, parts of the brain are very active that make you miserable. But if you can dial down the activity of those parts of the brain and step into the objective self, then you have that opportunity to make rapid transformational shifts. And so if you keep a journal, that helps you take perspective and it helps you look at your life objectively, at least for a little while. So I know my journals used to be full of misery and problems and rehashing all the challenges of my life. It's so boring, Clint. Just go over all the disasters and problems of your life every day. I used to write those miseries in my journal, and they just make depressing reading. After a while, I thought, what do I care about that stuff 10 years later? I'm going to write the triumphs and the wonderful insights and all the powerful things that happen. So now, in my journals, that's what I write down. And that gives you perspective on your life. And then you'll be amazed. You can grow so far, so fast that within a year, you're like a different person. And most of us remain trapped in the same local self. Once you develop a relationship with your non-local self and the non-local universe in meditation, then what you're journaling about, the insights and the brilliance that you download from those altered states. Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, said that's where all great ideas come from. Albert Einstein said that every great scientific discovery has been made in an altered state. He discovered the theory of relativity in a dream. It took him another 4 years to figure out the math, but the basic idea came to him one night in a dream. So great art, great literature, great science, great dance, great architecture, great education, great law, all these brilliant capabilities of human beings come in altered states and we don't get them by staying at the level of the daily grind, the local self, and hammering away at a little limited life. You want to step back and make that subject-object shift, use a journal, do things that catalyze perspective taking, which again is a very different brain state configuration from ordinary life, and suddenly your life can change radically for the better. You start to hit those 7 times happiness levels, and by the time you start to do that regularly, you're hooked.
And so one thing you said in there, and we'll probably end up jumping around from chapter to chapter because I'm already seeing so much overlap, is you talked about the subject-object shift. And subject-object shift and naming the demon, were 2 ways that you highlight for addressing the demon and selfing. Can you share with our listeners what selfing is, why it's such an issue, and how naming the demon and then doing the exercise we've talked about with making the subject-object shift are what help us get out of that? And they both, as a segue, they both really reminded me a lot as well of cognitive behavioral therapy and
Yes.
And reconfiguring our brain to ignore the voice that's telling us the wrong things and really reconfigure it to the more logical. But I'll pass it over to you, Dawson.
Yeah. And as a fledgling meditator, I learned to meditate when I was in my early teens. I went and joined a spiritual community when I was 15, and I was trying to escape from my own personal misery. I learned the great tradition, the perennial philosophy behind the world's religions. I learned to meditate, learned energy healing, learned all of these things, and trying to get less miserable, making a little bit of incremental progress along the way. But when I close my eyes to meditate, I have the experience common to everyone. You close your eyes and thoughts arise, and they're distracting, and you can't find stillness of heart or peace of mind. So that's the usual experience. People try meditate, they crash and burn, all these intrusive thoughts, and then they give up. And so did I. So I gave up for many, many years. It wasn't until many years later I began to actually meditate every single day. So what the brain defaults to when it isn't doing a task, the task parts of the brain, the task-oriented parts of the brain are generally in the lateral parts of the brain. And if you think about your eyebrows and your ears and an imaginary line inside your head between your eyebrows and ears, wrapping down to the back of your skull, there's something called the task positive network. And when you're making your grocery list, and when you're writing a blog post, and when you're talking to a friend, and when you're doing any activity, the task positive network is on. When you relax, when you quit doing stuff, the default mode network pops on, and that's the mode the brain defaults to when it isn't being required to do a task. And the default mode network has some really interesting functions. And among those is it is constructing our sense of selfhood. So when I talk about the local self, when I talk about having a local identity, being enmeshed in the local world around you, that's what the default mode network builds. It what tells you that your name is Clint Murphy, my name is Dawson Church, this is where we live, this is what we do for a living, this is what our personal lives look like. That self is built by the default mode network. And it's really valuable we can build a self like that, except that that self is usually under siege from bad things that almost hurt us in the past or that did hurt us in the past, and bad things like those past things that might hurt us in the future. And so the default mode network ruminates constantly. Sally said that mean thing to me. I got that miserable email from my colleague 2 years ago. I got fired from my first job at 17. And so our default mode network regurgitates all of this old stuff, which is fine for our ancestors when they were worried about tigers and snakes and poisonous plants and all these things they had to deal with 10,000 or 100,000 years ago. It was really useful for their brain to default to thinking about all those threats and the ones they might encounter tomorrow. Now that there are no tigers and are no poisonous snakes to go after us every day, it just worries. And so the default mode network just drives us nuts with worry, especially when we try and meditate or get away from it all. And so that's the part of the brain that fires up. I call it the demon, DMN, the demon. It just wrecks our happiness. It's not a happy part of the brain. And happiness is found in the present moment. The default mode network's focus is on the past, bad stuff in the past, bad stuff that might happen in the future, and it's not in the present moment. To be in the present moment, you have to shut down the default mode network or definitely reduce its function. So that's what we train ourselves to do over time. We learn to shut it down, and then we learn to dial up other parts of our brain, especially the compassion network. So you want to practice techniques that'll do this, and then you'll start to have a much different perspective on things. You'll be in the present moment. Your happiness levels will explode. And that's what these Tibetan monks and these Franciscan nuns and others we study do. You park them in an MRI, and their default mode network is like dialing down the dimmer switch in your home. It just dials way down. The sense of self goes away. And suddenly, with all that worry going away, they're in the present moment and they enter ecstasy. So the challenge for us Westerners is learning to do that same thing too.
Oh, there's so much to unpack here. The first spot I'd love to dive into with you is the average person. You were talking there about meditation. We covered a lot of things and we'll jump to them, but meditation. And one thing that a lot of people do is they think that meditation means I'm not supposed to have any thoughts. And if I can't get there, I'm failing. And that's not accurate. There's, as you indicate, 4 stages of meditation. And we cycle through them, and it's bringing ourselves back. And that's what they may be missing. Can you take our listeners through what those 4 stages are and where most people seem to have that slip up because they don't recognize a couple of the stages as part of the equation, Dawson?
I was so relieved to see that image and that study from Emory University. And the Emory University researchers point out that meditators go through these 4 stages, even experienced ones. Andrew Newberg wrote the book, How Enlightenment Changes Your Brain. I'm working with Andrew Newberg right now on a new scale for measuring enlightenment experiences. And he says that even meditation adepts go through these 4 stages. Those Tibetan monks you so admire, they're going through them as well. So the first of them is the state you get to when you're in union with non-local mind. All is well. You've touched the pinnacle of human experience. You are having a mystical experience, and you're feeling one with everything. It's just absolutely wonderful. And unfortunately, it doesn't usually last more than a few seconds, because what happens is the mind starts wandering. So when the task positive network dials down, the default mode network cranks up, and your mind starts wandering. That's monkey mind, the active mind hopping around. That's stage 2. And that happens even for those meditation masters you think are so perfect. Then, third thing that happens is you notice, geez, I feel terrible. I'm thinking about the hole in my socks. I'm thinking about finals. I'm not thinking about, I'm no longer in heaven. I'm wandering all over these random ideas and thoughts. So you realize that's stage 3. Stage 4 is, and each of these stages, by the way, has different brain areas that light up when we do this. Stage 4, the brain area lights up that controls both negative emotion and random thought. And then once we control that, once we regulate the emotion, we then pop back into the mystical experience. And then the mind wanders. We recognize mind wandering. We bring ourselves back, stage 3, back into stage 4. So we're in this constant 4-stage process. What I point out in Bliss Brain is I say, it's not how long you spend in that final pinnacle mystical state that counts. It's how often you return your mind to that state after it wanders. So essentially, we're saying mind wandering is normal. Everyone's minds do it. You aren't a bad person. You aren't a failed meditator or a failed human being because you can't still your mind. I meditated this morning, Clint, for about maybe an hour and a half. And if my mind was still 5 minutes at that time, I'd be surprised. I had to keep on doing the 4-stage cycle myself over and over and over again.
It's the key is catching it. Oh, wait, I'm wandering. Bring it back. Back to the whatever your anchor is. For a lot of people, it's bring it back to the breath or a mantra. I love that, Dawson. The interesting part, so when you talked about the demon or the DFM, there was a study that you quoted, and one of the times we tend to be the most unhappy is when we're resting. So everyone thinks, oh, well, when I'm resting, I'll be happy. And you had a beautiful analogy of a car engine that's actually just revving when we're resting, which is switching from the task-based system over to the DFM. Can you share that with our listeners? And is that why we get so unhappy? Is because the DFM just starts bombarding us with all these, and if it was a roommate, we'd kick it out because it almost never says positive things to you. I don't know a single human that has ever said the voice in my head is a positive person.
If there's a roommate, we'd kick it out. What a great analogy. We would. And so, this was a mystery in neuroscience for a long time. You would think that when we're in the middle of our workday, if we're engaging with our family, the brain's highly active. It's obviously using a lot of resources. Now, the brain uses a ton of resources. It's only 2% of our mass. It uses 20% of the energy in our bodies. If our brain's wattage was hooked up to a light bulb, it would light up your whole room. It makes that much energy. It consumes that much energy. So the brain is sucking in all this energy, 20% of our energy, all the time, and it never dials down. It never dials down, never dials up by more than about 10%. So when we say go lay on the couch after work and have a beer, why is the brain still running at the same pace it was running when I was in the middle of a meeting doing a presentation to my boss and my team? Why? Is it still consuming 20% of the body's energy? Why isn't it just dialing down and taking a rest and dialing down to 2%? Why, when we sleep, is it still using all this energy? So this was a profound mystery in neuroscience for a long, long time. And eventually we discovered this relationship between the task positive network and the default mode network. And so as you dial down your activity, we dial up the amount of energy being consumed by the default mode network. The quickest way to shut it down is to do something. You go do something, you distract yourself with a task, and the default mode network, then all the energy going to it just gets drawn into the task positive network, and you're no longer thinking all those negative thoughts. So we're this constant sort of ratio of activity between those two. And so what these Harvard psychologists did was they gave people a smartphone app to download, and then they would ping them on the app at random intervals. They'd say, what are you doing and how do you feel? And they thought that when people were with friends, they'd feel good, and they do. They thought when they were at work, they'd probably feel bad. And actually, they don't feel that bad at work. Most people feel pretty fulfilled at work. They felt worse when they were doing nothing. They were relaxing. They should have been having a good time. And they were often the least happy. And it was because the default mode network was all cranked up. They were ruminating about the past, and they were projecting those fears into the future. And it's just the way that the brain works. And so realizing this means this lets us off the hook. It means this is our fundamental anatomy. We have to recognize this is the way our brain works. And then once we know what the problem is, we can find solutions. And some of these Tibetan monks, again, they can shut down that default mode network activity in a few minutes. We at one woman in our most recent retreat, a 7-day retreat, by the end of the retreat, she was shutting it down in under 60 seconds. So she closed her eyes, enter this meditative state, and in under 1 minute, she's just in heaven. She's had the 7-fold increase in happiness and compassion and joy. She's in touch with non-local mind. She's in flow, advanced flow states, and she is just having an explosion of neurochemistry, pleasure neurochemistry inside her head. And it only took her 1 minute to get there. So that's really what I want to be sharing with people and encouraging them to practice, is these things they can do that get you there that fast.
I'm looking forward to taking people through it. So you highlighted right there, and interestingly, one of the things you said was the energy usage in the average person's brain doesn't really fluctuate by more than about 5% to 10% in a day. But these Tibetan monks are able to decrease that energy usage by up to 40%, which was powerful. And I think it was, you said, by calming their parietal lobes, and I may have pronounced that one a little off. And contrast that with people who are isolated and lonely, and they end up being overactive in those same areas. So one thing I wanted to see if there was a link here is through COVID, we've had increases in isolation. And at the same time, one of the statements I've heard from a number of people is isolation equals amplification. And so we're seeing people with more anxiety, more depression, higher substance abuse. And is part of that, Dawson, is that their isolation is driving overactivity in that area of their brain.
Isolation is associated with all kinds of adverse gene changes, which again are linked to a shorter lifespan. So isolation is definitely a factor in a lot of lack of mental well-being up to outright mental illness. And the World Health Organization estimates that about 30% of people are now suffering from depression or anxiety due to the pandemic. So it is a profound pandemic of depression and anxiety as well as of COVID. And it's hard to overestimate the bad effects it has on your health long term. So it's really necessary to counteract that. Now, when you are alone and you are meditating and you are letting go of the local self and you are feeling yourself drawn up into and one with non-local self, and you're one with everything, you're alone, but you're not alone. You're in touch with the universe. You have this experience of oneness with nature and with the big cycles of life. And those people's brains actually show the highest levels of happiness. So paradoxically, social isolation can result in worse mental health. Social isolation in conjunction with connection with the all that is, which is what monasticism is, actually produces the opposite. And these people are extremely healthy, often to an advanced old age. So you are doing powerful things down to the level of your genes when you give yourself that connection with something larger than yourself. What also happens then, as Einstein said, and as Napoleon Hill said, you get answers. You're connecting with these information fields of wisdom far beyond what the local human mind can possibly come up with. And you just download all this remarkable stuff. And then you see the world around you changing because you're pulling in this creativity. In one of the studies I cite there, This was done by a really remarkable U.S. government agency called the Advanced Projects Research Agency, DARPA. And DARPA was doing wild things like remote viewing of Soviet missile silos in the 1970s. And they've done all these remarkable experiments over the years. But a DARPA study found that if you enter this state, your problem-solving ability goes up by 490%, almost fivefold, 5 times the ability to solve complicated problems. Other studies show that your creativity more than doubles, your productivity more than doubles. So you then leave meditation, you start your first meeting at work, you're twice as productive, twice as creative, with 5 times the problem-solving ability. Once when I was working on, on the book, and we were also dealing with a really difficult problem to do with our server, and we were setting up this new and unusual server to do private therapy sessions with people, and it has to be a end-to-end encrypted server, totally compliant with privacy laws, and has to have a lot of protections that the average server doesn't have. And we were just having a really difficult time making this whole server thing work, because we had to integrate it with our main servers and our main websites, which don't have any of those privacy protections. And we were having tech meetings with the tech people, and for about 6 months we were trying to solve this massive problem. And in meditation one day, I was sitting there, and suddenly just this little voice came into my head saying, "You don't have to integrate the server. All you need is a port into the server and out of the server, and let the server have its own totally integrated data management system, separate from all the other servers. All you need is a little portal back and forth." And I went that day to the tech meeting, where again, for like in 6 months of trying to figure out how to do this, and I said, we don't need to integrate the servers. All we need to do is have this portal talking back and forth between them. And these smart tech guys who have much higher IQs than I were like, "Oh God, really? We can." So you get ideas. You're 5 times as good at solving complex problems. You're much more creative, much more productive. Your work life is just dramatically better than it otherwise would be. So it really pays off to enter those advanced states of non-local awareness. You aren't just less lonely, you're also downloading all of this wonderful information from those non-local fields.
An analogy that my first ever guest on the podcast and friend Peter Beresford used that I found beautiful was he equated it to gardening. And when you have earth that's hard and it's not tilled, you can't grow anything. And meditation is like tilling the soil. And
Yes.
it just aerates it, and it gives room and space for growth. And the growth is our ideas. And I agree, all of my best ideas tend to be when I'm in a meditative state. It's almost, I've only written one book with my sister, but whenever I have an idea, it tends to be when I'm meditating, and all of a sudden a chapter just writes itself, and I get out and start writing away and send her a note, right? And for people who aren't doing it, they're not seeing that. And what I loved was that you highlighted thousands of EEGs and Tibetan monks, nuns, multiple religions, different paths, but they all had the same, what was referred to as an awakened mind.
Yes.
And the research also showed that same awakened mind was what high achievers have when they're in what we call flow state. So Dawson, what is the awakened mind, and what are the signatures or signs of when someone's in an awakened mind state?
Yeah, that's such an interesting point you make there. And that was a real surprise to the researchers when they first discovered that non-monks and non-adepts and non-meditators also could get into the awakened mind state. And this is a genius. So the EEG was invented in the 1920s by a German doctor called Hans Berger. And then in the 1960s, some EEG experts said, what would happen if we hooked up a Swami to the EEG? And so this British engineer who worked on radar during World War II, his name was Maxwell Cade, and I tell the story in Bliss Brain. He began to hook up these Swamis to EEG machines, and he found that they had certain patterns. And he hooked up many different swamis, and they all had the same pattern. He hooked up people in India, he hooked up people in South America, he hooked up Native American shamans, he hooked up Taoist Qigong masters, and they all had this exact same pattern. And so in his career, he was creating this database of these brain waves and showing they all had the same brain waves. And the waves essentially they have a lot of the slow waves, and the slow waves are theta and delta. They also have a lot of alpha waves. And so the other researchers in the space began to realize that alpha waves were really important because people in these happy states had a lot of alpha. They also had very low beta waves. And beta waves are the brain waves of ordinary waking consciousness. But when you're anxious or upset, you have a lot of beta waves, and almost all the other activity goes away. So people in stress have an attenuation of all the other brain waves, and they just lose anything resembling the awakened mind. When you meditate, you have the awakened mind, and the interesting thing is that people from all different religions all have that same pattern. And, the religions look very different. I mean, think about, Hinduism with thousands of gods and all these different sects and forms of worship. Judaism, the monotheistic religions, Christianity looks totally different theology. Islam looks different. Taoism looks totally different. So there are all these different religions, and they all look completely different on the outside. In fact, they've fought a whole bunch of wars in history, and yet we hook their masters up to an EEG, and they're all having the same experience. And that experience is the mystical experience. And that is common to all religions. So they look different because those founders, Buddha and Jesus and Moses and Muhammad, they came down. Muhammad had a night journey into heaven, and he came down with this message of what he'd seen. But he came down in Mecca and Medina in the 700s, and he spoke in the idiom of his time. Same thing with Buddha 2,500 years ago. Same thing with Jesus 2,000 years ago. So all these religions picked up the trappings of their local societies, civilizations, and they look different as a result. But the mystical experience is the same. And then Max Cade realized this, wrote about this. Other great philosophers, Paul Brunton was a guy who wrote about that. I'm working on a course to offer his work to a wider audience now. Also emphasized that the mystical experience is the same. Houston Smith wrote the book The World's Religions in the 1950s, also said the mystical experience is one. So that started to get known, both from a neuroscience perspective and from an experience perspective in the 50s and 60s. But then Max Cade's successor, Anna Wise, she said, well, what if I hooked up a famous ballet dancer? What if I hooked up Pablo Picasso? What if I hooked up a scientist who's just known for her breakthrough discoveries? And she found the awakened mind, same awakened mind pattern. And we then began to realize that it's what we've also been calling flow. When it was in athletes, when it was in high performers, we called it flow. When it was in mystics, we called it mysticism or the awakened mind or the peak experience. But it's the same brain state, regardless of whether you enter it from flow or whether you enter it from meditation. That's the beauty of it now, is you move it into meditation, you sustain it throughout the day, and you basically spend your whole day in the awakened mind, and it is incredibly joyful. It's very grounded. And the other wave that was discovered after Max Cade died, highest wave is gamma. And gamma is the wave of integration, creativity, joy, compassion. And the brains of these mystics are absolutely exploding with massive gamma, sustained gamma. And so that's why people get into bliss brain. They just feel so incredibly good, and their brains are making enormous amounts of gamma. And that's the potential that we're now seeing is possible for people both in the monastery and in the workplace.
So one thing that you started to do in your research, Dawson, was you said, hey, there's all these multiple practices of stress reduction, of meditation. What if I combine all of them? What if I bring a bunch of these things together? And in doing that, you came up with a path to bliss brain. And so what I thought we could do is break down what some of those individual practices are along the path: tapping, signaling the vagus nerve, generating alpha, heart coherence. A lot of people don't know what heart coherence is, don't understand how beautiful it is. I think of it as quantified meditation as an example. And then once we have a semblance of what the pieces are, take people through what is the 7-step process to get to bliss brain.
Clint, I watched a little boy at an ice cream store once, and there were 45 flavors. And this little boy, maybe 7 years old, is like, pistachio looks awfully good, but then chocolate caramel looks delicious, and that watermelon ice cream. He just stood there for a long time. He could not make up his mind which of those flavors to to sample because they all look too good. And I was talking in dialogue with people at various research institutions and students of various philosophies in the late 2000s. And like I talked to Roland McCready at HeartMath, and like Roland told me, he said, when we hook up meditators and see their heart rate variability, we find that when they meditate, they drop out of heart coherence. And I was like, Roland, that can't be. I mean, surely meditation should put you into heart coherence. So no, it drops you out. So when I got home from the conference, my housemate at the time was a meditator. I hooked him up to an EEG. I saw his brain waves. They were beautiful. He was pretty heart coherent and just in his waking state. I said to him, now, Jeff, close your eyes, meditate. And boom, he was out of heart coherence. So Roland was right that most meditators are not in heart coherence. So I wanted to put together a meditation style that put people into heart coherence. But then like the little boy who wanted the pralines and cream on top of the pistachio and the watermelon and the whole stack of ice creams, I thought, let's also do mindfulness. Let's throw in tapping. Let's do some vagal nerve reduction. Let's do some alpha brainwave induction. Let's do all of these best practices of meditation all at once. And I found if you do them all together, they take under 5 minutes to do, and then you have all of them in a string. And I was at a conference a few months later, and I asked the conference organizer if I could do it with the audience, and she said yes. And I'll never forget, Clint, standing there in front of this conference in Toronto, Canada, big room full of people doing this with everyone, and the whole audience just dropped into this deep state of coherence. And then, to my absolute amazement, they all went into coherence together. Several hundred people all in heart coherence together. You could tell their respiration was sinking. Many people came up to me afterwards and said, Dawson, that's the first time in my entire life I've ever succeeded in really meditating. And I realized that this combination method was powerful. So I stuck it up there on the web. I called it Eco Meditation, put it up there for free. And somebody asked me why I called it ECO, Eco Meditation. And it's just because all the good names were taken. That was all that was. I was scraping the bottom of the barrel. That was all that was left. I wanted biomeditation. Somebody had that. I wanted this I had all these much better names, but the only one that wasn't really taken was Eco Meditation. So I got that. Although now I grow to like the name. And of course now, and then my webmaster came to me around 2015 and said, Dawson, we're getting tens of thousands of hits on ecomeditation.com, and it's a crummy looking website. You haven't paid any attention to it for 5 years. And then I began to realize that I needed to do something with it and started to teach it and research it. And in fact, we just got word today that a major randomized controlled trial using MRIs has been accepted for publication in a high-level neuroscience peer-reviewed journal. And that study shows that this combination method, stacking HeartMath, mindfulness, self-hypnosis, tapping, all of these things on top of each other, like the pistachio on top of the watermelon, on top of the pralines and cream, on top of the chocolate and Neapolitan, all those flavors together, that combination of all of them produces these extraordinary states, just like we see in these meditation masters in flow, and it does it in people who've never meditated before. So I'm just so grateful we have this thing now. We've been giving it away free for 10 years now. It's being used by hundreds of thousands of people all over the world, and it just works. It just is a phenomenally effective method. And our study we did, our MRI study, is astonishing. I showed the brain scans to one veteran researcher who's done a lot of studies with monks and nuns. He said, "Oh yeah, clearly I'm seeing these are the typical patterns we see in Tibetan monks with 40,000 hours of practice." And I said, "These are non-meditators after 28 days." And the guy, I mean, he could not believe it. He could not believe people were reaching these same states. They looked like they were 10,000 hour meditators. And with this combination method, they're getting there in a month. So I'm just so grateful. Again, this is what science gives us. We don't have to guess. Is it prayer beads? Is it the shoal? Is it the scripture? And it's not. It's just these simple instructions that we can get from these traditions. We do them, and they put us in these deep states.
And so for our listeners, do you want to just guide them through what those 7 steps are, and we can do together like a quick eco meditation, just so they get a bit of a flavor for what they're doing when they go to the website and take it and do it live, Dawson?
Yeah, so it's very simple. So, Clint, you've been using the M wave, and the M wave will guide you into heart coherence. And one quickie way of getting there is to slow your breathing down to 6 seconds per in breath and 6 seconds per out breath. And so there are lots of other things you can do, but that very basic breath will get you into elementary heart coherence. But if you then visualize breathing in and out through your heart, and also you imagine a connection through your heart with somebody else that is loving and kind and compassionate, you'll go to deep heart coherence. If you relax your tongue on the floor of your mouth, you will automatically send a signal to your vagus nerve to tell your whole body to go into relaxation mode. If you picture space inside your body, you will then go into alpha brainwaves. So we'll do that just very briefly now, just go 5 minutes in, 5 minutes out, and you'll feel how you can literally sense something going on right inside your own body right now. So begin by noticing your breath flowing naturally in and out. And imagine the breath flowing in and out through your heart. Breath flowing in and out through your heart. And cross your hands over your heart. And with your fingertips, tap gently on your skin. And imagine all the tension, all the stress leaving your body. Breathing in through your heart, breathing out through your heart, tapping gently on your skin as all the stress leaves your body. And now reverse your hands and tap with the fingertips of the other hand on your skin as the last of the tension leaves your body. Stop tapping, relax your hands. And as you breathe in and out through your heart, slow your breathing down to 6 seconds per in-breath and 6 seconds per out-breath. Relax your tongue. Relax it completely on the floor of your mouth. And notice the volume of space between your eyes. Notice your breath flowing in and out through your heart. 6 seconds in. 6 seconds out. Notice your tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Notice the infinite space between your eyes. And feel the life inside your cells as you live in this alive body. And imagine a beam of energy pouring in through the top of your head. Life energy pouring into your body, pouring into your cells. And as that life energy pours in, it energizes all your body's energy centers. As you breathe 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, notice how relaxed your tongue is on the floor of your mouth. Notice the infinite space between your eyes. And think now about a being loves you unconditionally. It could be a saint or an angel. It could be a mythological or archetypal figure. It could be a pet or an animal. It could be a mentor or guide. This is a being that loves you unconditionally. And as you tune into this being, send a beam of your heart energy to connect with this being of unconditional love. Notice the color of your heart energy beam. Notice the size and texture of your heart energy beam. As you now connect with the source of unconditional love. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Infinite space between your eyes. Breathing 6 seconds in and out through your heart. As the energy of life pours in through the top of your head, And now allow your heart energy beam to expand. As heart energy radiates in every direction from your heart, like the rays of the sun, going out in every direction to connect with every single atom in the universe. And feeling the compassion and connection between your heart and every single atom in the universe. As your heart energy rays radiate out in every direction. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Infinite space between your eyes. Breathing 6 seconds in and out through your heart. As your heart energy rays radiate out like the rays of the sun in every direction to connect with every single atom in the universe. And now gently detach those infinite heart energy rays from every atom in the universe and focus again on that one source of unconditional love. Just one ray, one beam from your heart to that being of unconditional love. Breathing 6 seconds in and out through your heart. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Infinite space between your eyes. And then gently detach your heart energy beam from that being. And bring it all the way back inside your own energy field, your own heart, your own body. Notice how relaxed your tongue is on the floor of your mouth. Notice those 6-second in-breaths and out-breaths through your heart. And with the next 3 breaths, prepare to return your attention back to the here and now, back to your environment. Notice the infinite space between your eyes. Notice the infinite space inside your body. And notice the volume of space inside your feet as they ground you to the earth, ground you to the here and now. With the next breath, open your eyes, look around you with gentle, soft eyes. Notice the smallest black object in your environment. Is there a round red object in your environment? See if there's a letter G in your environment. And just notice how good your body feels to have given it this deep sense of relaxation, put it into flow, and had that peak experience of contact with the infinite.
Oh, Dawson, that was absolutely amazing. And I'd love to dive into some of the technology with you. One of the things, having M-Wave and HeartMath for the last decade, I would tell people about it and they would say, well, how do you know it's real? That's quacky, that type of thinking. And for those who haven't used it, it tells you red light, you're out of coherence. Blue light, you're getting there. Green light, you're in coherence. And people will say, well, how do you know green light really is good? And the only thing I can say, and Dawson, you'll relate, is I've almost used words akin to, because when you're in coherence, it's just an absolute state of bliss. You know that's where you want to be all day. And so when you learn how to get there, and I didn't have all of the things, so you've armed me with even more ways to get there. But some of the ones I was using were quite aligned with what you're recommending. On the breathing, it was very close. All I'd altered was I would do a box breathing, 6 in, hold for 6, 6 out, hold for 6. And I find, and then exactly like you say, I picture a memory with my children where they're yelling like, I did it, daddy, or I love you, daddy. And it just warms your heart. And it just gets you in your brain just calm, in your heart joyful. And so for people, just keep rewinding to Dawson taking us through that eco meditation and get yourself into that state and then say, hey, this is something I want to be able to do every day. And there are guided meditations that Dawson can take you through either on his website, or I believe, Dawson, you also have eco meditation on Insight Timer.
Yes.
Which is a great app for people who want to try something different than Headspace or some of the other apps. Insight Timer has wonderful learning for people. Thank you, Dawson. So one of the things that does in getting to that state of bliss, and so you talked about mystics, and mystics have always talked about reaching these altered states. And modern people think, okay, that's just some crazy writing in some ancient text. That can't be real. But the research shows that 7 key chemicals can be released through meditation. And I think what you wrote was that it's the only way to release all 7 of them at the same time, which is where that bliss comes from, if you will. And could you explain to people how that works? What are these 7 bliss neurochemicals, and what is I think the terms are exogenous versus endogenous, and how are we able to trigger all 7 of them, Dawson?
This was really fascinating to delve into. And first of all, these chemicals are highly pleasurable. And the molecules that stimulate that pleasure are often ones we seek from sources outside the body. And an example is magic mushroom, psilocybin. Psilocybin is very popular. People are microdosing on psilocybin. But why does that one compound, psilocybin, work to produce these altered states? And there are a million other compounds in plants that have no effectiveness at all psychoactively. And the reason is that because psilocybin docks with the receptors in our brains and makes us high. And the receptors it's docking with are serotonin receptors. But what you can do is certain things you practice in meditation actually trigger the production of lots of serotonin. So here you are having essentially a magic mushroom high, and people doing eco meditation for a while report hallucinations and voices and music and all the things that people report on trips with psilocybin. So it's just your own body's own natural serotonin. Dopamine is active in the brain's reward system, and people who are addicted to heroin or cocaine they get lots of dopamine, but you don't need heroin and cocaine. What those heroin addicts actually are addicted to is dopamine. They just don't know you can get tons of it internally by meditating. One study found that meditators can have a 65% rise in the dopamine in their brains. That's a pretty good slug of heroin and cocaine. So you're getting heroin and cocaine, you're getting psilocybin, you're getting ayahuasca, you're getting a lot of THC, which is the same molecular shape as anandamide, which your body makes naturally. Beta endorphins, you're triggering beta endorphins. Those are masking pain. So you sit down and meditate, and your back hurts, and your knees sore, and you're uncomfortable, and your mouth's dry, and blah, blah, blah. 10 minutes later, you're lost in ecstasy because beta endorphin kicks in. Beta endorphin is 3 times as strong as synthetic morphine, so it masks your pain. You have a little squirt of norepinephrine, which in excessive amounts produces anxiety, in small amounts produces euphoria. Nitric oxide is known for its ability to enhance performance. So you have all of these neurochemicals you're producing endogenously inside your own body with meditation, and you just feel absolutely wonderful. In fact, the challenge I have, Clint, like even during the meditation we just did, I am tempted. Like I start to get out there, and it hasn't happened yet on a show I've forgotten to come back. but it's been a close shave a few times. I'm just so like flooded with ecstasy, and people who are doing it all are flooded with ecstasy too. And it's like, okay, gotta come back now.
Yeah, I have to get grounded back in the real world for sure.
That's why we have to look for G, look for a number 7, find a red object. We want to get you back into the real world. When I was doing this first,
so you're grounding us there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I see what you're doing. Okay. And is this why? And it was interesting because I had a Buddhism meditation teacher who was a phenomenal individual, and we would get to outside of the teaching, we'd be talking about people who were going on an ayahuasca journey or MDMA or psilocybin. And he would say, Clint, I understand why they're doing it, but all they need to do is meditate. They get the same thing. They're just impatient. And the problem with doing it the way they're doing it is they can't get back there.
Right.
So they get in quick, and then they can't integrate it into their life because they got there too fast.
Yeah, I asked a Cherokee Indian medicine woman who leads medicine journeys. She leads peyote journeys. I mean, she's a medicine woman with plant medicine. And I asked her about it, and she said, it's just going to open the gateway so you can see that land exists. You can't get back there unless you learn to do it by yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly what he would say. And he would say, you'll get to all these spots once you've put in your time and you're doing it properly. You'll get there.
It was so funny. Last year, my wife and I decided to take a microdose. We have a really nice naturopath friend who prepared a microdose of psilocybin for us. And we thought, we'll take a microdose, see what happens. And so we took a microdose, and I got maybe about halfway to where I get in meditation. It was nice. After like an hour, it hit, and I felt the same kind of buzz I feel in meditation. And then after about 2 to 3 hours, it went away. And my wife felt the same way, except that she was a little disoriented, and she missed a step in our house, fell down, and hurt a rotator cuff on her shoulder. So it has there are side effects.
Yeah, it depends, right? It's all dependent on how large the microdose is, because if you go small enough, there's almost no sensory impact during the day, but you may in your sleep. I've heard, for anyone from work who's listening, that you could have quite vivid dreams, Dawson. So it just wakes things up when you go to sleep, but during the day, if it's a small enough dose, no impact, right? It just unlocks a little bit of that antidepressant. From a lot of people I understand are saying, okay, instead of taking antidepressants, I'll just take very small doses of psilocybin and use that as a mood stabilizer. Now, I'm not advocating, please, no one, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician. I would never, always, if you're on any medication, I've been on medication for a long time, don't change medication without talking to your physician. Just have to get that caveat out there. But that said, that raises 2 questions, right? if meditation releases all 7 of these and they feel so good, why don't we just create a pill or a drug that people can pop in and release those 7 chemicals in that exact, we can call it awakened mind. Why not do that, Dawson?
Darn, Clint, that's why I'm not rich. I gave it away free, and it's just a state of mind. It's mental. It's not a drug, so not patentable. So yeah, and we can actually get these same states chemically, but there are 2 words in a word, 2 words. Why we don't want to do that, and that's side effects. If you look at the studies of marijuana, people who take marijuana for pain in trials, comparing them to people who are not taking marijuana have equal pain. It does mask pain temporarily. Long term, the people who use marijuana have more pain. For depression, same thing. Short term has some effects. Long term, the people who take marijuana are more depressed. In one study of teenage boys who had 2 joints of marijuana, anatomical changes appeared in their brains, adverse anatomical changes. To people who are heavy users of marijuana, it has dramatic effects on the brain's memory and learning centers. And after a while, it's just destroying a ton of neural tissue. So that's marijuana. Ecstasy, we have 30 years of studies of the long-term effects of ecstasy, cognitive decline, loss of muscle mass, loss of bone density, a huge, very rapid aging, all kinds of adverse changes from ecstasy. The ones that have been studied all have side effects, and that's the reason why you want to get a natural high, not an artificial one.
And we're going to talk about that a little because meditation almost has the reverse effect, if you will, of anti-aging. And part of that is an example you write about, and I love this, was for millennia, again, we've known that physiology or exercise can affect our anatomy. We lift weights, we get big muscles, right? But everyone always thought that the brain only worked one way, and that was deterioration. And so what we've learned, though, through meditation and through neuroplasticity, we can actually create a healthier brain. Can you tell our listeners about that? Because that, to me, is part of, Dawson, we're going to, at some point in the near future, be able to 3D print our own body parts, right? So we'll be able to replace everything. The only one we won't be able to replace is our brain. And so that's the one where we have to do everything we can to keep it as strong and as healthy as possible to live a long, healthy, prosperous life. So with that, over to you.
Yeah, and so neuroplasticity was discovered around 1950, 1955. A researcher called Marion Diamond showed that if you put rats in an enriched environment, their brains start to change. And that research was built on over the years. And then in the 1990s, the research was done on geriatric patients who had strokes, who showed that the brain will actually start to repair itself. So all kinds of discoveries have been happening over the last 50, 70 years in this respect. What's new, Clint, is the latest research that's emerging now and will emerge in the next 20, 30 years of how quick the process is. And in Bliss Brain, I give the case history of a TV personality called Graham Phillips. He wanted to learn meditation, wanted to learn mindfulness, and he had a TV crew, so he went to an advanced neuroimaging lab. They measured the volume of every single part of his brain, and he then began to meditate, and after 8 weeks, he went back to the neuroimaging lab. They measured his brain again, and they discovered, to their amazement, that the emotion regulation coordination center of his brain, part that coordinates emotional regulation, had grown 22.8% in 8 weeks. Imagine if you started to do bench presses, and your biceps grew 22.8% in 8 weeks. It would be, the most remarkable bodybuilding feat ever known. That's how fast some of your brain centers grow. They don't all grow that fast, but some of them are growing 10% a month when you are meditating and doing mindfulness. And so I'm talking to neuroscientists. We haven't begun to really gather data yet, but we're mapping out a research plan, and we expect to show that the parietal lobe's changing, temporal lobe's changing, the insula's changing, the prefrontal cortex is changing big time. You are literally remodeling your brain with every thought you think.
And so you want to remodel it in a way that works more efficiently and better for you. Rather than be in that spot, we're letting the demon or the DFM rewire our brain into negativity. We want to take control and through the practice of meditation, rewire it to be optimistic, to be happy, to be positive. And that will allow us to manifest much more greatness in our lives, I would assume, Dawson.
And it's hardware. At that point, it isn't theory, it isn't mind, it's brain. And you're resilient not because you have a positive outlook, you're resilient because you have the neural hardware in your brain. And I think that that is going to be understood much better in the next 10, 20 years in neuroscience. We think these are spiritual states or psychological states or traits. What they actually are is they are neural tissue. Either we grow it or we can't. Like, people talk about visualization and positive thinking and affirmations and all of these kinds of approaches. And I'm going to tell you, like I can bench press. My biceps are about 13 inches around. I can bench press 200 pounds. Jason Momoa, the actor, Aquaman, has 18-inch biceps, and he can bench press 400 pounds. And with my 13-inch biceps, Clint, I can visualize pressing 400 pounds. I can have it on my vision board. I can intend to do that. I can believe I can do that 100%. And I still can't bench press 400 pounds. I just don't have enough bulk in my biceps to do that. And the same thing with these brain states. We think it's psychology. We think it's spirituality. It's not. It's brain anatomy. You just have to have enough tissue in there to be resilient and happy and creative. And so I'm focusing now more and more and more on how do we just skip all the philosophy, go straight to basically focusing on intensive training of those neural circuits with a view to making them as big as possible, as fast as possible.
And you highlighted at it a little right there, but we didn't dive into it. And up until now, we've been talking about different mental states. One of the things you highlight is that through meditation and the neuroplasticity, we actually start to create mental traits. And can you identify for the listener, what is the difference between that mental state and a trait? And I believe the trait, like you're saying, it's hardwiring, it's the hardware, hence it's a little more permanent, it's a little more long lasting, and that's really what we're trying to create, is it not, Dawson?
Yeah, and so in psychology, state is transitory, a trait is permanent. Get some news about my company might be downsizing, so I'm anxious. I'm in a state of anxiety. If I become a fearful person, I just have a fearful worldview and outlook on the world, then I have the trait of anxiety. So one's temporary, one's permanent. But what we see now more and more in brain science is that traits are hardwired. And so that's why I talk about rewiring the subtitle of the book is all about rewiring your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy. So when I was in the fire and I lost everything, I didn't just have a positive attitude. I literally had, over the years of meditation, built enough circuitry there to be a resilient human being, have a resilient brain. And you want to do that before a disaster strikes. So meditate regularly, meditate daily, make it a practice. You're sending those signals through those neural bundles over and over and over again. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Neurons that keep on firing together, wire together bigger. And so now we have bigger and faster neural bundles, and then we have the trait of resilience and creativity and joy. So that's what's happening in neuroscientific terms.
That is powerful. And that then is the goal that we're trying to get to. And so outside of the meditation, what are some additional practices that we can be doing to increase our resilience and our optimism in our daily lives?
There are several practices that you can do. In my earlier book, Mind to Matter, I list about 30 of them. And these are all evidence-based practices. So just grounding yourself, walking barefoot on the earth, being in nature, being especially barefoot in nature, walking on the beach, walking on the forest floor, even going to your neighborhood park in the middle of the city, and just grounding yourself is powerful. Time in nature produces epigenetic changes. It literally turns genes on and off. Just to have time in nature, and again, a similar gene expression profile appears in urban city dwellers who go and take a walk in the park. Spirituality, social contact, creativity all have an effect. Certainly deep, spiritually intimate, emotionally intimate conversations and contacts do. Warm, caring friendships do. Compassion does big time. Of all the things that stimulates neural growth, the number one thing that does that is compassion. So that does it. I think that the way to return back to that baseline of feeling good every day during the day is EFT tapping. So you start the day feeling good by meditating, but then, the Russian hackers are out there at 9 a.m. You have a tech meeting. You're stuck in traffic. The kids are screaming. Your sports team loses. Just stuff happens. There's just life out there. That's when you use acupressure tapping, which measurably shifts the energy flows in your body and your brain. And so EFT takes about 2 minutes to do. I have a lot of free videos and downloads available for that. Do the tapping, and that just gets you back to that baseline of well-being quickly. So breathing, certainly conscious breathing does it. Conscious breathing will help you return to center. Any kind of physical intervention, tapping, of course, is tapping on your body. We did a bit of it during the eco meditation. There are other tapping routines as well. Anything that grounds you in the breath and the body and helps you dissipate your stress is going to help you throughout the day. And the goal is to just build up a suite of skills like this that you do without thinking. You have a stress, you just start tapping. You hear some bad news, you take a few conscious breaths. You have a break between meetings, you go outside and take a walk. You just start to incorporate these things in your day. And epigenetically, again, Mind to Matter is very focused on which things have an effect on your gene expression, and all of these things are ways of supporting yourself. Experiment with ones that work for you and find the perfect ones that match your lifestyle.
And so one of the things you talked about right there that was beautiful was compassion. And Dawson, let's say we go through our bliss brain and we've done the eco meditation to get there, we've done our tapping to start the journey. Do you ever recommend finishing it up with a loving kindness meditation? And we almost were when we were spreading our ray in a circle around us to touch every living being. We weren't necessarily doing a loving meditation mantra, but in essence, there was a feel of loving kindness meditation to that.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a kind of a long-range answer. So I'm working on a new book right now, and the new book is about the social implications of all of this. But what I've been doing for the last couple of years is I've been looking at the work of the non-dualist masters, and especially one that lived in India in the early 20th century called Ramana Maharshi. And there's a whole group, though, of these non-dualist masters going back hundreds and then thousands of years. And non-dualism essentially means that you become one with the all that is. There's no two. There's no me, little human being bumping around in my local life, trying to figure it out down here. And there's the great unknown universe out there. There's only one. And there's unitary consciousness. There's lots of evidence in science of this unitary consciousness. And these great masters taught that. So what I've been doing with some masters and also some experts in this field is we've been organizing the ideas of the non-dualist masters into a practical program. And so rather than have to go to the monastery and spend 10 years and studying with a master, we're identifying the milestones of human development that get you from having an average existence to being in that state of oneness all the time. And it turns out there are 36 of them. And once we knew that there were 36 of them, we could put them in order, we could chart them, and we could design exercises to move people from one milestone to the next. So we're putting process together now, bringing the first few people through this to gather data on what's happening with their brains, what's happening with their bodies, happening with their productivity and creativity. And then we're going to really focus on making this information widely available. We believe that the time that this was curated by monasteries and nunneries and secret societies is over. We know the brain science is there, and we know we can bring this to millions of people. We know we can bring it to them free or at very, very low cost. And so we have this really large-scale project going on to actually bring people through these stages. And it's possible to train someone and bring someone through that through all of those 36 milestones in about a year. You can get a pretty good glimpse of it in a month or so, but in a year, you made radical, substantial changes to your brain and your life. So that's the way we're approaching that question right now, is building a systematic growth program, kind of like university, to bring you through all of those stages.
Oh, and if you need a guinea pig, feel free to give me a call. That sounds absolutely wonderful.
I'll give you there's no website for it now, but there's a place you can go, enter your name if you'd like to be notified when we actually make this thing public too. So I'll let you know about that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, and then we can throw it in the show notes. Dawson, as we wind down, is there anything that we haven't covered in this conversation that you want to leave the listeners with?
Go and have a blast. I mean, life is absolutely marvelous. Life is wonderful. In these states, you wake up in the morning, you're full of energy. You know, your physical energy goes through the roof. I haven't been measuring ATP, what's going on with your mitochondria. But if you're 65, you may well feel 35. If you're 95, you may well feel 45. I mean, people have huge amounts of energy, creativity, and joy. And you just are in a state of bliss that the average person doesn't know there's there. That's my challenge in explaining all this stuff. It's bliss brain. It's as far removed from the average human experience as you can possibly imagine. And so that state is available to everyone, and you pretty much just live there 24/7. And the fire happens, the pandemic happens, and the financial crash happens. All this stuff happens now. You're in the world, and you deal with the fallout, but you deal with it just totally grounded in love. And you know the universe is love. When you let go of local mind and merge with non-local mind, you are just so immersed in love. Clint, sometimes I finish meditation, I sit there, I just cry because there's so much love out there. What do I do with it? Where does it go? It's like you're in touch with the infinite universe, and the universe is infinitely creative, infinitely full of information, and infinitely loving. And so you're in touch with this absolute wellspring of love every day. And it is so easy. You just have to do those few simple steps and make it consistent day by day by day till you build enough of a neural pathway to be able to accommodate that state. So that's the real message here, is that this is accessible to us. It's totally easy. It's just a matter of practice, and you can reach these extraordinary states. And then you live the rest of your life there. I mean, you then have decades ahead of you being super healthy, being super happy, and optimizing all of your potential as a human being. So a more wildly exciting life I can't imagine, and I want everyone to live as that expression of their non-local potential too.
And so, Dawson, you recommend then that you start your day off with the bliss brain to really drive that energy throughout the day and give you all that problem-solving ability and calmness and joy and happiness and love.
You start your day that way, and just do eco meditation for a few days in a row. And don't forget that cocaine, heroin, serotonin, psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, all of these chemicals are in your brain. So if I can get you doing eco meditation for a few days straight, a month, you'll be a hopeless addict and you'll never stop. You'll be addicted to your own feel-good chemicals in your own brain, and you'll keep on doing it. So people who start don't stop.
Excellent, Dawson. And where can people find you?
Well, for the book, go to blissbrain.com, because you get the book there for free. You pay shipping and handling, but the book itself is free at blissbrain.com. And there are 8 meditations there that are free, and you can just use them, and they correspond to chapters of the book, but they're all about unlocking Bliss Brain yourself. So blissbrain.com for the book. That's a good place to go. If you like the book, write a review, because those reviews really are critical in giving the book momentum. So writing a review is the best way you can spread the word. To get the EFT tapping mini manual, go to my main big, huge, humongous website, and that's just go to tapping, the word tapping, like we were doing earlier, tapping on your body, tappinggift.com. And we also have discovered that one of the effects of doing this meditation is it drives your immune system, your immune markers, sky high. And there's a special meditation on tappinggift.com that gives you that immunity meditation. So if you go to that website, there's this meditation that we've shown in 2 clinical trials can more than double your levels of immune markers. And you want to be immune. You want to have high immunity. So those are the 2 places, blissbrain.com and tappinggift.com, and leave a review on the way.
And then for those listeners who would like to start off their new year in a revolutionary way, you can also be on retreat apply to be on retreat with Dawson and his team, where you'll learn all this and be doing this and starting your new year right. And Dawson, you've been now doing a January retreat. Did I read for somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 years you've been doing this every year now?
Usually, I used to take 2 weeks. This year, I'm taking 3 months off to do that. Usually, at least 2 months nowadays. And I'm very focused. I really, put in a lot of energy and effort into my day job. But then the end of the year rolls around, and I need to basically go to the monastery again for a while and just really just bliss out for a few weeks. So I go do that. I do journal and write and do things as well. Oh, also, if you want to, that program is not public yet. Won't be public for a long time, but we're collecting the names of people who'd like to go on that 36 milestone non-journey to dualism over a year. And just email my team, which is support@eftuniverse.com, eftuniverse.com. Just email them and tell them you'd like to go, you'd like to have your name included on the notification when it's called the short path to oneness. So when the short path to oneness is made public, we'll be accepting applications. We'll be assessing people to see whether it's right for them to be on that journey. And then I'll be mentoring people in that journey for about a year through those 36 milestones. And that's a private program. And you just need to email support and let them know you'd like to be on that list, and they'll add you to it.
Excellent, Dawson. Thank you very much. I appreciated having you on the Pursuit of Learning today and learning from you.
What a service, Clint, you're giving your community here. It's absolutely wonderful. And the depth to which you dive is remarkable. So thank you for the powerful, powerful transformative work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on the Pursuit of Learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.